Awesome. So we are now recording. So I've got Stephen here, Stephen Manor, and I will let him introduce himself, but he is going to teach us a little bit about the boys' defensive mechanics, and give us some good ideas on how to get those boys to play great defense. So Stephen, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, we can start, and I can actually share my screen right away. I've got a PowerPoint that we can kind of work our way through. So let me make sure I've got the entire screen. Let's do this. Share here. All right. And we'll start from the beginning. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, again, my name is Stephen Manor. I have frankly, a wealth of lacrosse experience. I have been working with Homegrown and their travel team, the Chill, for coming up on, I want to say it's 6 years, if not seven. So I've been around the Homegrown team and programs and clinics for quite some time now. Um, and so my background, my personal background is I grew up in Woodbury. So I grew up right around the Twin Cities area. I actually currently live in North Branch with three kids, 5, 3, and 9 months. He just turned 9 months. Two dogs, three cats, some sheep, and some chickens. So it's a busy farm up here. But yeah, still have been able to find time to coach lacrosse for the last, let's see, it's been 18 years now. Well, play for 18 years and coaching for at least the last 15. So again, I've been around the sport for a long time. I love the sport. I love um, being around the kids as they learn how to play and how to use it as a vehicle to learn how to navigate life in a lot of ways. Um, my experience started in ninth grade. I didn't actually get the chance to play youth lacrosse. It wasn't around Woodbury as much as it is now. But I started playing in ninth grade at Hill Murray. I played a lot of D midi and long stick midi through high school. I actually switched up to long stick midi and close defense in college, and then did some face-offs actually. So I've kind of run the gambit of positional work as far as that goes. But I currently play in our homegrown men's league as a close defenseman. So that's kind of where my roots are and where I love to be as a player. And I do a lot of defensive coaching for the Minnesota Chill, as well as defensive specialty coaching with a lot of homegrown clinics and camps and things like that. I was a head JV coach over at Hill Murray for or head JV coach and assistant coach for a couple of years when I first started coaching, and then I coached at Hudson High School as a head varsity coach for a year after being their head JV coach, head and assistant JV coach for a couple of years prior. And again, I have been around homegrown academies and clinics for many years, as well as, and I do currently coach the U14 team for one of the U14 teams for the Minnesota Chill. So staying busy and staying involved with that, to be sure. So before we get started, just again as an overview, my background is in defense. I started coaching when I was an 18-year-old with the U13 team in Hudson. So I've started my coaching journey with the youth in particular, and I personally believe that um, youth coaching and youth administration and things like that are what allow high school and travel programs to thrive. So the more effort that we put into our youth programs, the better outcomes we get as we see kids move into the varsity and eventually the college circuits and things. So that's a big part of why I love to coach and why I love coaching youth in general. But to start with, just as far as coaching defense at the youth level goes, part of it becomes a need to set goals for them as youth. They may just be trying lacrosse for the first time. They may be having played for the last 6 years. Even at the U14 level, we just have a lot more opportunity for kids to play lacrosse in many, many different ways and in many, many different places. So setting goals as coaches and as administrators for what we kind of want our own programs to look like, what goals we have for the kids as far as their development goes. Obviously the goals for a U10 team are going to be wildly different than the goals for a U14 team, and there's a big gap in between there that I think is important to call attention to. So you have different kids every year. There's kids that don't come back. There's new kids that come in. There's friends that meet and they fall in love with the sport. And so setting those goals and having a program identity, as well as a defensive identity, whether you're a coach again or an administrator, however it goes, is important for them to kind of feel like there's a direction for them, and then helping them set those individual goals, whether it's I want to have 20 takeaways during an association season. I want to not miss a ground ball during this tournament, whatever it ends up being. But those pieces of goal setting are very important, and show the kids that there is a progression. There is an upward progression into the work that you put in, especially a defense will pay dividends and will A, get you more playing time, B, allow you to enjoy the sport significantly more. And so that's just a big part of how I approach defense, like just making sure that they have goals that are realistic, attainable, and they can say it from the beginning to the end of a season, whether it's the summer season, spring season, winter ball, whatever it is, they can say, I think I met those goals, and then working out from there. Um, as a whole, the fundamentals of lacrosse are still just as important to defense as they are to any other part of it. So the fundamentals of the passing, catching, shooting, cradling, ground balls in particular, are all just as valid for defensive players as they are for offensive. Shooting in particular is one that, especially at youth levels, is not quite as encouraged in my experience. I actually had a coach for several years say defensemen do not shoot, which we all know is untrue. Pole goals are big momentum swings at any level, and so it's important for us to incorporate the core fundamentals across um, across our defensive teaching. And so just again at the youth level, teaching those fundamentals, and then defensively focusing primarily on our footwork, on our ground balls, and on our stick checks. Are going to be what allow those kids to meet those goals that they set at the beginning or middle or end of a season, going into the next piece. And so those are kind of the pieces that we're going to be harping on during this session, are those defensive focused things like the footwork, the ground balls, the stick checks. One thing I did want to touch on, I know different programs have different policies regarding, again, how they want their kids to approach learning defense. In my experience, so my own experience, when I started in ninth grade, I started with a short stick as a midfielder. I learned how to play defense with my feet. I learned how to do that, and then found that I was significantly better at defense than I was at offense, and picked up a long stick and transitioned my way into a long stick midi role. And that was a very natural progression for me. And having that background in short sticks and understanding how to use my feet just helped me as a player. And so if there is an option, not all kids start at U10 where short sticks are pretty much required. Some kids start a little bit later, but if you have the opportunity to cut down a long pole, sometimes they're a little bit unwieldy for younger defensemen. And sometimes it's a good idea to help them transition into that, just to help their stick skills, let them gain confidence, and again, learn how to use their feet as we play defense. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit more as we get moving here. But just that is just kind of where to start. And so just as a primary example of where we can go, I don't know where everybody is at, again, whether everybody's fairly familiar with lacrosse or if they're just new to the sport, or if we're just trying to learn. But as an example, I wanted to bring up a video here of a high level player, and just have you guys listen to some of the things that he's saying, how he's moving, and see that when we set goals, and as our youth guys are looking at examples, there are tons and tons of examples of kids and players at the college level that they can pull up on YouTube, they can pull up on Instagram, as examples of good defense, of good communication, of good things that they can do and take into their own game if they want to practice. And so we have this video here. This is a video from 2023. This player is actually currently at Lehigh, Division One school. And so a couple things I just wanted to point out here were just some. I just wanted you guys all to listen to how he's talking, to see how he's moving. And again, I believe at this point he's a senior, but just as an example of what kids that are just starting their career can get to if they work on these fundamental skills. Right off the first second, and I have it queued up here. But he's immediately communicating, I've got points, I've got points, telling his teammates, working through that defensive communication, and we'll let it play here for another second. I'm trying to call that out. Clear, crisp communication and knowing his role. And so I'll pause it there again. And
So,
so
Steven, I don't think we saw, at least I didn't
even,
see the video.
oh, could we hear it at least?
I think you could hear it, yeah. Or
Okay. And correct
I
me if
don't
I'm
know
wrong.
if you could hear it very well.
Okay, that's okay. I'll just point out a couple things that he said that he mentioned then, where he's saying I'm hot, and using those communicative terms, and telling his defense, this is my job. I'm telling you what my job is. And at the youth level, a lot of times we're trying to encourage them to talk at all, if if not at a high level. And as they get more comfortable with just being on the field and being with each other, that's kind of where we can get to. And unfortunately, the video might not work, but that's okay. Let's get rid of that and pull this back up here. So I just wanted to use it as an example where, oh, let's go. Give me 1 second here. Go back to, yep, we are presenting. Okay, that's okay. I'll jump back into here anyways. But ultimately, our expectation as youth coaches and youth leaders, is we want the kids to improve every game. We want them to be encouraged. We want to use the skills that we learn, at every practice and tournament and everything like that, to allow them to enjoy the game. A lot, like I said, there's kids that have been playing for many years already at the U12, U14 level, and there's kids that have never touched a stick before. And so defensively, making sure that they are being encouraged and being taught through those failures, that they may have, so that they can get to a level where, who knows, Minnesota's a hotbed now. Maybe there's coaches that are going to be looking at them, later on in their high school career. Just so some basic terms, as far as defense goes, and I can use my drawing thing here. So we have our on ball, off ball, basic communication things, where on ball you're covering the ball carrier, off ball you're obviously not covering the ball carrier, but you're still involved. We have the restraining line here, right along so this is going to be the top of the restraining box. Goal line extended is going to be right along the goal line here. And these are just very common terms that defensively we're using to teach the kids where they're at on the field. We have the crease, obviously. We have the alleys or the wings out here. And again, they're on both sides of the field. Top side is going to be the very top of the box. And we'll cover the golden rule of defense a little bit later on here. We have X way back here. And then a couple of other terms that we'll cover here in another slide. We have being the slide, or being the hot guy. We have our approach and our breakdown. And then something that we didn't hear, in the video of that other player, was something, just a quote or a term that I use frequently, is I'm in. I'm in, I'm in, I'm in. And a lot of that is related to communicating where you're at on the field with your teammates and being able to cover from the inside out. And again, we'll cover that here in a slide or two. So when it comes to defense, the things that we're trying to teach kind of split into two categories, whether it's individual defense or team defense. We have the individual being your actual positioning about how you're covering the ball carrier. You have your footwork, and your stick skills. So your footwork, again, I said it earlier, defense is played primarily with your feet. When you start relying on your sticks and your stick check too much, then it's very easy to get beat. And so we're working on teaching our youth to play with our feet first and then get good positioning so that we can throw our stick skills. So they all tie together into that individual defensive strategy. As a team, we are learning if we are off ball, we're learning where are we at on the field? Are we the hot guy? Are we communicating where the ball is? Are we communicating if I'm on your left or on your right? And then we're also communicating through those defensive formations, whether we're in man-to-man, whether we're in zone, whether we're in a crease slide, or whether we're in an adjacent slide. All things that kind of tie together with having good individual defense and having good team defense that the players may or may not have experienced before. And so we'll focus first on ball. So covering a ball carrier as an individual defenseman, right? Like I mentioned earlier, footwork is everything when it comes to defense. We are working with our 2 feet, our hips, our knees, and working with the stick in front of us as a guide. Essentially, it's a measuring stick. It just shows us pretty much exactly how far away the guy is from us, so that we can move our feet appropriately and adjust and force him away from the cage with our feet rather than just our stick or a stick check. So feet, I'm always telling my youth players, you play with your feet, you play feet first, and from that, then we work into the ABCDs of defense. Where as the first thing that you do, if the guy that you're covering is getting the ball off a pass or off a ground ball, whatever it is, we need to approach in an appropriate manner. And the picture here is showing our good athletic defensive stance. Stick is in front, knees are bent, head is up, chest is up, and we're ready to go either direction on our approach, right? So we're coming up to the ball on our approach, and our breakdown is getting us into this athletic stance, right? So we're sitting, a lot of times, as it says here, I tell the kids to pretend they're sitting in a chair. Their stick is in front, chest is up, shoulders are out, and they're ready to, again, use their feet to adjust to the ball carrier. When we say contact, at the youth level in particular, again, a lot of reliance is on the stick and trying to take the ball away or trying to throw stick checks. But when we say make contact, a lot of what that actually means is making contact with your hands into his body. And so whether that's a long pole or a short stick DMIDI, you have to make contact with the person before you're able to play good defense. If you kind of keep him at that 6-foot length in terms of a long pole, then he can kind of still move around. But if you're pressuring him and getting those hands on and getting your hands on him, excuse me, on him and on his hips in particular, then we've made contact and we can pretty much direct him wherever we want him to go. And that's where it comes into the drive piece. So again, a big part of defense, and we'll cover this in a little while, is driving our offensive players down and away from the cage. Because obviously, if you're behind the cage, you can't shoot at the cage, or if you're shooting at the cage, it's an easy save for our goalie. So we want to drive the guy when we've made contact away from the ball, away from the center of the field, and away from topside. And that's just part of what makes defense significantly easier and team defense significantly easier, because then we know where the slide is coming from. We know how to cover that appropriately, because offensive players are taught the exact opposite, where they're trying to they're trying to take topside to increase their shooting angle. The closer they are to the center of the field, the bigger the goal is. So we want to approach, break down, make contact, and drive them away from that centerpiece so that we can push them farther down the alley and take away those good shots. On top of that, leading into the stick skills, right? If we've made good contact, we've driven them away, they drop the ball. An important piece of the on-ball defense is scooping up that ground ball, right? Those one-time ground balls, right off of whether he's dropped the ball or whether we've made a good poke, lift, or slap, and getting a good ground ball to transition the other way. And so those are kind of the focuses that we need to be looking at when we're teaching young kids, right? We teach them footwork first. We teach them how to position themselves to address the ball appropriately. And then On top of that, or in conjunction with that, we're teaching them how to get good ground balls and still pushing those fundamental skills, which are the passing, the catching, and the ground balls primarily. And so when we teach youth, when we're on ball, the golden rule, as I mentioned earlier, is we never get beat over the top. That is one of the biggest pieces that will cause a defense to pretty much crumble. And that's what offenses are taught to try and do every single time. Because again, they're trying to shoot, they're trying to score. And the best way to do that is to get over the top and to continue driving towards the goal. Because then we as defense have to communicate who is the slide now. Where is it coming from? Things might be happening off ball that are not being communicated appropriately, and getting beat over the top and giving up the center of the field that way makes our job significantly harder. So if we can take away topside, and again, we'll go back here. If we can take away this middle of the field here, right, and take away this entire center and force him down and away, then all he's doing is running himself, all the other player is doing is running himself away from the goal and making his shot that much harder. When it comes to stick checks, when it comes to teaching stick checks, there's all these videos of defensive highlights of kayaks, of pencils, of over the heads, things like that. And at youth, there is always going to be there are always going to be some players who are significantly taller than others, and it is in their best interest to teach them poke, lift, and slap, and in that order, right? So when we poke, we want to poke right at the other player's belly button to make sure that he can't change hands, he can't be moving back and forth, and we have pressure on him at all times. And when we've got that pressure, then we can start lifting either his bottom hand, we can start lifting his elbow, and then as he's starting to try and run away or get in the way or get out of the way, then we can start working in the slap. But those pokes and those lifts are going to be what serve the kids the best. And even at the highest levels, that's still what they're teaching. They're teaching the poke first, get your stick in their hands, lift, make them separate so they either have one hand on their stick or they are just kind of off balance. And then we're getting into the slap from there if it's available. But those pokes and those lifts are absolutely fundamental for when we're teaching youth players how to play good defense. And to go back to our previous point where we never get beat over the top, it's not always about getting beat, right? You may get beat. There are guys, especially at the youth level. Again, there are wild differences between how fast somebody is, how fast they can run, how much they can run, and it's not always about whether you've gotten beat. Some kids will take it very personally if the guy in front of them beats them to a spot, whatever it is. It's not about getting beat. It's about getting beat correctly. It's about getting beat so that we can play good team defense. And as it says here, if we play defense, if we play on-ball defense correctly, we're always forcing the ball carriers to the sides of the field. Are shots going to come in from the alleys? Yes. Are they going to score on those? Yes, it happens. But at the very least, when we force the ball carrier down and away, we are creating the best chance for our defense to recover. We're giving our goalie the best chance to make a save, and we're giving the rest of our team the best chance at making a good defensive stop together. And one thing to harp on at youth in particular is after they're done playing on ball, they need to stay involved, right? Too many times in my own experience, I see kids where the ball has moved, they drop their stick to the ground, and they kind of wander back towards the crease. Encouraging them to stay involved. The play is still going on. The ball can always come back. Their guy can still cut. Things can still happen, and their job is not just done when the ball has moved away from somebody else. So that's another part of on-ball defense that, again, is something good to teach the youth, that they are still involved. The play is still going on, and something good for them to remember. Moving from on-ball to off-ball, and again, we're just breaking them into the two categories because those are going to be the most common sequences of defense in lacrosse. So in off-ball defense, we're asking first, and this is something that, again, coaches can decide at the beginning of the game. They can decide during the middle of the game, whatever it is. Are we in a man-to-man or are we in a zone? and where is the slide coming from. And from that, we're getting into slide packages. There are youth teams that have players that and coaches that are able to understand slide packages and run them very efficiently. There are others that don't. And being able to assess that and say, okay, we want kids to be able to understand how to play man-to-man defense, and by the end of the season, we want them to be able to understand how to play a zone. That's just something that's up to the program. But as it goes, those are the two main pieces of, or two main types of defense that we're going to play. A lot of times across levels, man-to-man is going to be the most common. A lot of times zones are used to kind of throw somebody off balance. Some teams rely on it very heavily, but man-to-man is probably going to be the most common that we see. And from those defensive formations and those styles, essentially, we are off ball. We're trying to teach them field awareness. Where is the ball first? Where is your man, or where is your zone if you are playing a zone? And where is the goal? Where are you in relation to the goal? So we're trying to train them to ask those questions internally, and then adjust accordingly. And from that, we get into the communication piece where we say, who am I actually covering? When I'm working with 12Us and they're wandering around in the middle of a crease and saying, I think I'm covering someone, I'm on the field. I typically ask them, what number are you covering? Because they'll see the number on the front or they'll see the number on the back, and they can repeat it back to you and say, this is who I'm covering, this is who I've got, and then they can stick with that man from there. Big proponent of that. Out of that, knowing who is hot. And so there are a couple slide packages. We have the crease slide and the adjacent slide. We can cover those here in a little while, but knowing your role on the field is part of being off ball, because you're not just covering the ball carrier. You may have a different role, and it's shifting constantly. So even just as an example here, the ball is up here. If we are in a crease slide, then typically this midfielder right here, if you can see my mouse here, is going to be the hot guy. Or I'm sorry, one of these midfielders or defensemen is going to be the hot guy. Red is defense, I apologize. So this closest midi is going to be the hot guy, and these two are going to be communicating on who is actually picking up as the two. And so that's the second piece of the communication and understanding what slide package are we in from there. From the defensive, or the primary teaching points when we are off ball, especially at the youth, we don't want kids, like I said, just kind of wandering around and being like, I'm on the field, so I must be doing something. We want to teach them to protect the house, or the paint, or the crease, whatever term that you want to use, that because defense works inside out. Anything from 10 yards and in that we allow as shots as defense is, in my opinion, a failure. We want to force those guys out to the alleys. We want to force them to take shots from 12 to 15 yards out, because even at youth, our goalies are typically able to track those significantly more easily, and we want to protect the inside because that is the most dangerous place on the field when we're playing on defense. Another thing is we want to keep our sticks in the passing lanes. So when we're off ball, we are trying to make sure that if a pass is going across the field, they try and make a really long, ill-advised pass. We're keeping our sticks up. We're trying to knock the passes down so that we can get a ground ball and transition the other way. And with that, keeping our heads on a swivel constantly. A skill that I used a lot for youth players is you have two holsters on your hips, just like the Wild West, and you're trying to be able to point both holsters to the ball and to the guy that you're covering. And I teach typically 2 seconds watching your man to see if he's going to cut, to see if he's going to move, checking 1 second on the ball, and making sure that you're following the ball as well as following your man and moving accordingly so that you can see both. And just making sure that they open up their hips enough to do that is a big part of, again, field awareness, teaching them how to understand how to follow a guy when you're in man. And even if you're in a zone, making sure that if a guy is in your zone, you are watching both the ball and the man and understanding where you are within your defense. And another big thing, especially at youth, is if you're lost, ask. And even at the men's league level, even at college, if something happens and a bad rotation occurs or something like that, and it's constantly talking to each other saying, I've got this guy, you're over there. And communication is so key. We work inside out, and if there is a player that is lost, a good rule of thumb is to teach them to find the crease first and work out from there, right? We protect inside out. So if they've lost their guy, if he's made a good cut and he has disappeared, then the other players on the defense can help him find him, and we can work out from the crease all the way out to the wings. So those are just some basic points when we're working off ball. So again, to touch more on the formations themselves, when we're in man-to-man, a lot of pros of man-to-man is for one, man-to-man is going to be the most common defense that youth players run into when they're playing defense. It's just very standard. Man-to-man and a crease slide are going to be probably the two most common pieces of defensive formations that they're going to run into, pretty much across anywhere I've ever played. So from that, it's a pro because it's very common, it's very translatable across all age levels, and it plays very well to individual defensemen, individual defensive strengths. So if you've got a guy who he is an athlete, right, and you know that he wants to just go and take away the ball, we can definitely go into a man-to-man and set him on the ball carrier and just let him run essentially. Um, so it plays very well to individual defensive strengths. It can create very high pressure on offenses, where if you are man-to-man and you are locking out the adjacent passes, it creates a lot of stress, especially at younger levels where they may not have experienced that, or they may not have confidence to say, oh, all I have is one guy to beat. Again, man-to-man is fairly easy to implement only because your jobs are fairly straightforward in that this is the guy that I'm covering. This is going to be my next job. I'm not the slide, so I don't have to worry about it. And again, it can just pare things down to a point where it's easy to understand, it's easy to digest, and it's also very easy to teach. A couple of the cons with man-to-man is in that having good athletes is a good thing. Having not so great of athletes can cause some detriment. Where if we're trying to play man-to-man defense and the other team is just outright more athletic, you're forcing a lot of slides to happen from crease, which can create a lot of missed opportunities in communication, and it can just kind of start breaking down your defense a little bit more from there. From that, it does require an understanding of slide packages. So whether you're in a slide, or you're in a crease slide, or you're in an adjacent, or if you're going to implement a coma slide, which we can certainly cover, all of the players on the field, uh, again, have to understand where the slide is coming from, who is the hot guy, who is the two, and it requires good communication throughout. Just because again, communication at the defensive level on defense is absolutely fundamental. Um, what can happen, what I have seen happen is the communication of who has who does break down, and it can kind of result in swarming, where you start to see 4 or 5 white jerseys going on one blue jersey because they all say I have the ball, and then you start seeing that swarm of kids kind of running around and not communicating through, and it certainly can happen, and that's usually only at kind of the U8 U10 levels, but it can still happen at older levels if the communication does break down. So just a couple of things within man-to-man itself. Another standard defensive formation is going to be the zone. Again, not a lot of teams run it as kind of their default defense, at least in my experience, but it is fairly easy to implement across most levels. It does accommodate some less athletic defenses where you may have midfielders who need a break and you fall into a zone because your defensemen can keep their shooters to the outside, and you have a really good goalie who it just is lights out from 12 yards and out. It follows that fundamental principle of defending from inside out and tries to force the offense to make poor decisions in the seams, and from those longer distances rather than trying to force things into the crease or dodge into a one-on-one, because as you can see by the diagram here, there is no one-on-one. You have easy help to your left and to your right, or if you wanted to slide from crease in a zone, you certainly can. It's not super common, but you have a lot more opportunity for help within a zone, and then you're kind of giving each person a role and a zone to cover, and so it can be very easy to understand for younger kids. The problem with that is it does require full buy-in, right? Even running zones, in my experience at the high school level, the kids have to understand that your zone is your zone, and you have to trust the other defensemen around you that that's exactly that's what's going to happen. That you're going to cover your zone and that they're going to cover theirs, and if you need help, you will ask for it, right? It does require a full buy-in from everybody on the field, because it does require the person playing the ball, as well as the two or three that are on the backside, to understand that everybody is going to be moving together. Um, the problem with zone in a lot of ways is because if the backside does get lazy, or if they do have a problem with calling out cuts or calling out um, through passes or things like that, zones can get broken wide open, and those cuts from top or from underneath can definitely cause issues with that 10 and in zone, because somebody might have been ball watching, somebody might have been back cut, whatever it is, and they didn't communicate it well enough, and then it creates problems for those goalies who are lights out from 12 and in, but struggle from 8 and in, and things like that. And at a core piece of it, the reason that I see a lot of man-to-man, especially in like travel ball, is there's less opportunity for, at least in general, there is less opportunity for individual skill development as far as the zone goes, because man-to-man is teaching you, hey, you're learning your approach, you're learning your breakdown, you're learning how to throw stick checks, you're learning how to cover an individual who could be more athletic than you, and you're teaching the kids how to work within that. And then within a zone, there's less focus on that individual defense, and it has to be a team oriented activity. Everybody has to be involved. It is expected that everybody is involved. And not saying that isn't the case for man-to-man, but it is definitely less apparent as far as when we run a good zone versus when we run a good man-to-man defense. So I know I did run through quite a bit of information, but I wanted to leave enough time in case we wanted to cover things like a slide package or questions about slide packages. I didn't have some slides on there for that, but I definitely wanted to leave plenty of time for that in particular. So I guess I'll open it up, Catherine, and we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, ask away, gentlemen.
Hi, John David here. I'm a volunteer coach at Mela. My son played at the high school level, and I've got a 12U player that's now playing for Chill on the 14 team. I was curious, when you start sketching this defense out for like a small group
Mhm.
or a group of younger players, do you basically walk them out on the field, or do you spend time? Is there a notation system? Like I've been reading Ronk's book, and he kind of numbers every part of the field, and he's got, you go here, and it kind of makes the shorthand as far as explaining those things really, really concise. Do you
Sure.
advocate something like that, or is it like
A
where would you
lot of
start?
Yeah, a lot of what I do, especially when I'm teaching youth, just as part of the field awareness teaching point, is saying, when we're in man-to-man, this is a lot of what you're doing is making sure that as a kind of setting up those general expectations, right? So we're not needing to defend all the way to the half line. We're saying, as a rule, you're setting up at the box line and in.
Yeah,
But as far as like specific zones, as far as defense goes, because it changes so rapidly, a lot of it is more focused on the positioning, where we're trying to take away the middle. We're trying to force those passes and trying to set ourselves up in relation to the offensive players so that we can
right.
have our sticks in the passing lanes. So as far as a notation, it's a little bit difficult only because we're trying to teach them as well, um, like I mentioned, where we're at in the slide package. So
Yeah,
again, at the 12U level, a lot of it is going to be starting to implement those slides where somebody gets beat. am I the hot slide? And we're trying to teach them the communication through that initially so that they know what they need to do in relation to the play that's happening. So yeah, not so much a shorthand as it is trying to really harp on the actual positioning of where they are in relation to the ball and where they are in relation to the goal.
I gotcha. It makes sense. And then what I've been watching as far as the offensive play, they tend. I'm seeing a lot of emphasis on like rotation, like on rotating triangles. Um, so as you're playing man defense with that, what's our defense looking like as those guys rotate in and out of the box? And do they stay with their guy or they switch off?
Yep.
They're going to bump, and how do the youngsters handle that?
For sure. A lot of what, as far as man-to-man goes, is follow your guy. When you start passing off and when you start saying switch, then it just kind of, again, at least in my experience, and
Yeah.
we're instilling a little bit of, I don't want to call it laziness, but a little bit of shortcutting,
Yeah.
where offenses are going to start to capitalize on that, especially between that 12U and 14U level,
Yeah.
where if they start saying, they're starting their rotation, and if we're not in a zone and not everybody understands that we are not in a zone and they just stand still,
Right.
you've then set up cutters in between your defensemen
Exactly.
that they can hit those passes, and then we're scrambling and we're
You're
saying,
finding trouble there. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so a lot of that is stay with your hand in his pocket, especially if you're the adjacent. So that's going to be the biggest thing that youth players, in my experience, struggle with, is understanding when they're the adjacent pass. So you've got a guy in the top right corner who has the ball, and you've got a midfielder who doesn't necessarily. Oh, I see the comment. We'll finish this and then we'll cover teaching which first. So, balls in the top right, the two adjacent passes, a
Right.
lot of youth players aren't taught quite yet to pressure that and to say, hey, you need to make sure that if he's catching the ball, you're getting stick on hands,
Yeah.
right? And because they're a little too worried about, am I the hot guy? Because they frankly may not know.
Right.
But from that, it's good to teach them how to pressure that out, and especially at 12U, again, they're starting to understand those concepts. They're starting to be taught more about those adjacent slides and the crease slides,
Right.
and they're getting a little bit more athletic where they can keep up with the guy altogether, and then throw those stick checks and throw those and start battling for the ground balls off of a pass. So
Makes sense.
let me catch this comment here. Man-to-man first rather than zone. So when would you implement a zone? So from a developmental level, I would definitely suggest teaching man-to-man first, because that just ties directly into teaching the individual skills, so like the footwork, the positioning, the stick checks, and kind of allowing them to explore that a little bit more. There's going to be kids that take really well to that, and there's going to be kids that are just ground ball vacuums. There's kids that are going to be takeaway defensemen from the time they're 10, and being able to let them kind of figure that out and again, learn the good footwork when it comes to an individual effort, because again, when you get to the higher levels, they're going to expect that you know those things, and so kind of relying on the zone. And I don't always want to say it's to just try and win games, but my philosophy with youth in particular is we need to teach those individual skills. When we get to a zone, that would be, in my opinion, closer to the 14U level, where they're starting to see offenses that may be really good, and they might need to start packing it in and starting to force those outside shots. But 10U, 12U, definitely trying to harp on those individual skills first so that they can then translate it and build off of that when they're playing individual defense as part of a zone. So that's my take on it.
Can you talk a little bit about how you teach the recovery from the slide? I mean, it seems
Yeah.
like as soon as there's a change of position,
Yep.
I'm telling the guys I want them to follow their man, but it seems like that could get confusing for them pretty quickly. Like I
Yep.
said,
So
everybody's out of position now. Started right, now I'm left. Do you understand? I mean,
Yep,
Oops.
let me get this up here 1 second. If I can actually get back to my PowerPoint. Can you guys see this okay? You
Yep.
seeing the slides change? Okay, so we'll go to this diagram here. So we'll just start with a crease slide, right? So we have, so ball is going to be right up here, and we're going to communicate through who is the hot slide. A lot of times it's going to be, and as you mentioned before, we're seeing the triangle setup as far as the offense goes, and the triangle setup as far as the attack goes.
Right.
So this is gonna be our first slide. The primary recovery a lot of times is with a crease slide, it's going to be your straight line, right? So
Right
you're
back to
trying
where
to,
you were.
yep, you're, well, not necessarily right back where you were. So what would happen is you would have this defense or this midfielder, and we can do the attack rotation here as well. But this midfielder will come up to cover the ball. Depending on how these two decide to cover this, if this attackman is saying, I don't really care, I'm not going to be involved, then that's fine. Then it can be this guy. Whoops. A lot of times, as a standard, though, we're trying to create those slides in as straight a line as possible. So it's actually going to be this defenseman is now covering this midfielder.
Okay.
This midi then will be recovering back to the attackman at the low backside. Because again, this is the one of the longest passes they can make, and he is the more immediate threat than the guy at X in most cases.
Okay.
So we're trying to create this recovery to this defenseman's attackman, and it will create a mismatch in a lot of cases. And that's part of the recovery where they need to understand it's like this is going to happen. You're going to get offenses that are going to capitalize on that.
Right.
And then but the alternate um, would then be the adjacent, right? And when there's a guy on the crease, it really kind of depends on your personnel. If you have a midfielder who is very willing to slide and very willing to go, and you have defensemen that can cover that inside and be that inside help, then by all means you can let him go whenever he wants. But otherwise, you have your adjacent slides where if he gets beat down this alley, then this defenseman is sliding up,
Okay.
this defenseman is sliding out, and the midfielder would then be recovering to wherever that defenseman is leaving.
Okay.
And so typically it's just going to be that 3-man rotation. It shouldn't necessitate any more than that. But to your point, where if guys are going to be rotating around and moving and all of that, the first slide is going to be a lot of times whoever is closest to the ball
Okay.
on the crease, right? And through that communication and through that happening, this midfielder is constantly yelling, "I'm hot, I'm hot, I'm hot." If he comes over, if say the ball carrier comes over the top and then starts his dodge, now the 2 slide is what's really the crux of it, because a lot of times better teams are not looking for this first option here. They're looking for where that 2 slide is coming from, right? They're looking for, and we'll just keep using this example from this top part here. Oops, pen instead. So this guy has been beat. They know that slide is coming to cover.
Right.
This attackman is being taught to show
Okay.
as behind that 2, right?
Right.
Because this guy has to come all the way from up here to cover him. And there's going to be a gap here because
Right.
this defenseman now has to split this midfielder as well as this attackman.
Right.
And there is an offset opportunity for them to either, if he commits to this midi and this attackman recognizes that, he's in a shooting position right here at about 7-7.
Yep.
If he overcommits to the attackman, he's now left the midfielder open.
Right.
And so that's something that is, we're trying to create the best percentages on defense as we possibly can. And a lot of times the shortest slides are going to be what does that for us.
Makes sense.
So that's going to be the big piece of it. And again, it can completely depend on the opponent that you're facing, where if they're just like, they're able to just snap the ball around like crazy, then it may be, like I mentioned, better to switch into a zone.
Okay.
Where you're starting to kind of settle into a 3-on-3 or a 3-3 typically, and you're starting to force them to take those outside shots so that they can't start those dodges and get a run and get ahead of steam, and then the breakdown happens where our slides are coming from.
Right. Makes sense.
So. And I will say a lot of YouTube videos. If you've got questions, there's actually one that I highly recommend. It's called Lax Film Room. It goes through college games and it breaks down offenses, and you can watch how the defense is adjusting to those
Yeah.
and what is making the offense successful. Like there's a ton of content out there, a ton of ways to really play with those different kinds of schemes, and show them to the kids. You know, they're on YouTube all the time anyway. So
True.
I've sent links out to team snaps. I've sent links out to parents and said, this is your homework. You need to watch this for. You need to watch this, and we're going to talk about it at practice. We're going to cover this and how you would respond to this at practice. A lot of times that's more for the 14U and above, but
Sure.
sometimes you get 12Us that, again, really understand what a slide package looks like. They've really grasped the individual piece of it, and then you can start working in those more advanced concepts, where, again, they're understanding the recovery and they're doing it consistently. So as long as you can continue building and continue challenging on that, then it's only better for them ultimately.
Sure. Makes sense.
So, yeah, I think we can give you guys some time back if we don't have any questions. Catherine, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that if you guys are all good, feel good about everything, then we can end this. And then I think both of you, Jared and John, are hopping on to the offensive one too. So I'll probably see you in a couple minutes because that one's next.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Enjoy, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steven.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope you have a good night, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you. You too.
Thank you.